Hey everyone, my name's Chris Wang. Hope you're having an awesome day today. What we are going to talk about real quick is GitOps and ultimately how to sell GitOps with Gitlab. So, in particular, how to do this, some of the things that we're going to talk about is first having a bedrock understanding of infrastructure as code, because this is what GitOps builds upon. Finally, understanding what GitOps actually is and being able to articulate this to a customer. And finally, what we're going to talk about is general approach and qualifying questions to ask a GitOps lead. So jumping right in, I want to talk about a story first. So in the beginning, when people were deploying infrastructure, everything was super manual. If I wanted something like a cloud server, then what I'd do over here is I'd log into my cloud account, and then I'd do something like hit the launch instance button. First thing it's going to ask me is what type of server do you want? Do you want Mac OS? Do you want Amazon Linux? Do you want Red Hat Linux? So second question is basically how large of a server do you want? Do you want it to be really big with 8 CPUs and 32 gigs of memory? Do you want a small one? So on and so forth. And then there's a bunch of different options that you can pick here. And every single option over here is something that I have to remember. It's something that people can make a mistake. If I have a new employee, I have to tell them what the answers to all of these options are. But all of these options have to do with things like network, storage, behavior of this server. Technology is basically complicated. And so there's lots and lots and lots of different options here. But then if I hit the review and launch button, I'll have a server that's good to go with all my configuration details in about 5 minutes. So all of that is great. And just continuing this story, people eventually realized maybe it makes sense to document the options that I'm picking here somewhere else. And ultimately, what I can do with some of this is eventually starting to get to the point where we can script the deployment of these servers. And so when you think about infrastructure as code, basically it is scripting deployments of servers. So here's an example of infrastructure as code in GitLab. So this is going to deploy a Windows server. And just like over here, there's all of these different options for network and subnet and things like that. All of this stuff is now documented as code. So over here, subnet, instance type, this corresponds with how big of a server we want. So that's CPU and memory. Image ID, this corresponds with whether or not we want a Red Hat server or a SUSE Linux server, so on and so forth. So the idea is all of that stuff that we picked in the user interface earlier, that's all just documented here. And now we can script this. So basically, if I want a new server, I can just run a script using this, and then I can have a new server. So what are some of the benefits of using infrastructure as code? Well, the number one benefit is automation. So the whole idea is that if I want to start automating deployment of my application, then I need to basically document my infrastructure as code so that machines can basically consume that infrastructure as code. If I want my business to be able to move quickly, so deploy 200-300 times per day, then I need that automation. And so this is another example of a business value that we get as we adopt infrastructure as code. The other main benefit that we get from infrastructure as code is greater security with standardized deployments. And so what I mean by that is if I'm some sort of large enterprise and I have 20,000 engineers that are selecting all of these things, then I can have some engineers come in and make a mistake and pick some configuration details that aren't safe and may be vulnerable for hackers. The benefit of something like infrastructure as code is if we're using this one template that's been secured and vetted by our compliance teams, and if everyone starts using this template for their server deploys, then theoretically, everyone is now deploying safe and secure servers into the cloud. So as opposed to having to, you know, this approach being ultimately unenforceable, If we're making everyone use our infrastructure as code, which has been vetted, then theoretically our entire environment is safe. So from a GitLab perspective, some of the things that we bring to the table is that we have version control. So basically who changed the standardized template when and why. And then we have awesome things like merge request approvals, which make it so that we have security and compliance into when someone is changing this template. So not everyone should be able to change this template. If our entire engineering organization is using this template, then it's pretty important that only a small number of people should be able to make changes to this template. So over here under this history section, then we could see, okay, well, there were only a couple of changes when and by these people. So now let's start talking about GitOps. Infrastructure as code is something that is well established in technology. If I type infrastructure as code into Google, you can see that there's over 500 million search results that pop up. But if I type in GitOps into Google, there's less than 1% of that. And so it's really important to understand when talking about GitOps that a lot of people don't know what GitOps is. It's not something that's super established. Some people don't even agree with it. But the reason why we're seeing some pretty good traction on inbound leads for GitOps is because people want to hear about this new practice that some people have been successful with. And so it's very important to take an educational approach when we are talking about these GitOps leads. So sort of diving really into what GitOps is. So continuing our story, first our customers are deploying servers manually. Then they start writing infrastructure as code. They're writing some scripts that are using this infrastructure as code. They're getting more efficient. This is all great. And then GitOps really is the next progression in this journey for many people. And the whole idea is now, let's have infrastructure as code for your entire infrastructure environment. And let's manage it with some sort of Git tool combined together with a CI/CD platform. And so what I mean by that is using this as an example. Let's just say that this defined our entire environment and we were going to make a change for it. And so let's just say that we want to scale up our environment. Right now, our environment's only one server. So what I'd want to do is I want to create a merge request here, change the count from 1 to 10 or 50 or however many. So I'm going to code in my merge request. That's all going to go through the approvals layer. And then after the merge request approval is, the changes take effect, then all of our CI/CD runs. And then this CI/CD is now going to be responsible for deploying all of those new servers. And so just combining everything together, the whole idea is we have infrastructure as code for our entire environment. If you want to make a change to infrastructure, then make a merge request. After the merge request happens, then CI/CD runs, and then automation really just takes care of the rest. So also just going back to the definition. So if you think about the term itself, GitOps, then there's two parts to it, right? So Git and ops. So the way to think about it is that it is Git-based operations. Anything regarding infrastructure, then use Git to change it. And then so now our entire operations team is leveraging Git for changes in security and compliance. So what are some of the benefits to GitOps? We've touched on some already, but the whole idea over here is really a security and compliance play. And so the idea is that we now have a history of our entire environment. If someone is creating new servers, changing servers, to tearing down servers, then our Git log over here is going to tell us who's making these changes when. And so the whole idea is if I go to this history view, then I can find out who's making these changes to our infrastructure. This is really great because we now for the first time, have an understanding of what's happening in our environment when. Previously, if you didn't have something like GitOps, then you probably have one log of your infrastructure in AWS. You probably have one log of your infrastructure in the other couple of cloud vendors that you have, maybe also some logs for VMware, stuff like that. But you don't have one central log. And the whole idea is that if you're using GitLab with GitOps, then this commit log is your one central log for all of infrastructure. This is something that is very powerful for many organizations and something that a lot of people want. Other things is that you have reduced shadow IT. And so there have been a lot of studies on shadow IT. The whole idea is that if you ask many different VPs of infrastructure and technology about how many servers do you have? I've been on many business calls before where I just ask about their environment, and even higher level executives don't necessarily have a good grasp on what's in their environment. And the big problem with that is that sometimes individual contributors go out and they go do their own thing. So for instance, if I'm an engineer, I just get a server over here, I launch it. And then what happens if I leave the company and I leave this server on for the next 5 years and it's just costing my business money and no one's ever turning it off because no one remembers that this was like the one server that I provisioned. So what shadow IT is when people go out and then they make their own side projects that management doesn't really know about. The big problem with this to an organization is that ultimately it's going to cost the organization a lot of money. And GitOps basically helps to reduce shadow IT because now you have that single pane of glass, that single audit trail. And we also force everyone to go through things like merge request approvals. If you want a server, you have to get it approved. And ultimately, this will help to reduce your shadow IT. The other big GitOps benefit is making your engineering organization more efficient across just across the board, right? So we're talking about automating infrastructure, all of the benefits of that, and having things like faster deployments and rollbacks. If you want to be able to deploy 300 times per day, then having something like GitOps can help you to do that. And ultimately, one of the questions that you may be asked is, okay, I understand GitOps now, but why should I pick GitLab for GitOps? The reason why is because we are the best CI/CD automation platform in the market today. And also that we are a single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle. And so if I weren't using GitLab, I'd probably be using something like GitHub for SCM. I'd have to integrate it with my Jenkins server. The Jenkins server would be responsible for deploying stuff. And then that would talk to all of these different cloud targets and they'd have to stitch everything together. If you want to have GitOps quick and efficiently, then our single app vision will help you to save time in implementing something like GitOps. So now tying everything together and talking about the general motion, my personal approach is that I don't mention GitOps unless it's specifically an inbound GitOps lead, simply because such a small chunk of the market knows about it and a lot of people don't agree with it. If you go and research many different tech forums, a lot of people actually don't like GitOps. So that's just something to be aware of. But out of those that are interested in GitOps, they've seen our marketing stuff, they want to learn more, then telling our story and telling how we are one of the market leaders in this is a really great way to convert some of these leads. And so some of the questions that you can ask is, how bad is shadow IT in your environment? Do you have a good gauge on changes made to your infrastructure? A lot of times people will say no. Then you can follow up with, would having a single audit trail help with your security requirements? A lot of people would really be interested in that. Another question that you could ask from like an automation perspective is, how much time do your engineers spend on maintaining infrastructure? A lot of times it's going to be a lot. And so now we can talk about how we can save these businesses time, ultimately allowing them to become more efficient. Some examples of specific GitOps conversations. Feel free to use this as a template. And yeah, so to summarize, GitOps is something that's great. It's opinionated. We're getting a lot of traction in it, and definitely think about some of the things that we talked about today so that you can have better success converting these GitOps opportunities.